All right, good afternoon, everybody. Is everybody able to hear me okay? Just want to make sure the audio is good before we go ahead and jump right in. All right, so we'll probably, I see a few more people joining. Thank you for the thumbs up. I appreciate that. Since it is 6 o'clock, I do want to be respectful of everyone's time and just jump right in so we can get started. Again, just as a reminder, this training will be recorded, so we'll be available on our Philadelphia MRC YouTube page for your review afterwards. So for those who aren't able to make it, I'll make sure to send out the link to everybody who attended. But you can also always check our YouTube page. It'll probably be uploaded by Friday, for those of you who want to go back and look. Okay, I'm just gonna fix a technical difficulty. 1 second, sorry. I have to unmute my co-host. All right, there we go. All right, so again, just thank you everybody for being here this evening. We greatly appreciate it. If you aren't familiar with my face or my name, I'm Satori Gibson. I have the pleasure of being your Medical Reserve Corps coordinator, and I'm joined by one of my wonderful colleagues this afternoon or this evening, Margaret Zeller, and I'll let her introduce herself, but she'll be providing this personal and family preparedness training for us. So right now I'm gonna hand it over to Margaret and let her do what she does.
Hello, good evening. Thank you so much, Satori. That was a really wonderful welcome. Thank you. Like I said, my name is Margaret Zeller. I'm the at-risk population specialist with the Public Health Preparedness Program, and I'm really excited to be here with you this evening. We're going to be diving into personal preparedness, which to my understanding has been a very hotly requested topic. So yeah, without further ado, I'm going to hop right into things. While I get my screen shared and all that good stuff, I am just going to go ahead and let folks know that in the event any of y'all have any questions about anything, please feel free to pop things in the chat. I will defer to Satori if we want to do this as we go or at the end of the presentation. We can definitely see how things go. I'm seeing a nodding head, so we'll go with that. Yeah, so let me see. Can we get this shared? All right. Can everybody see okay? How are we doing? All right, I see some thumbs up, so we're gonna dive right in. All right. So, like I said, this is a really exciting topic. And again, I just want to emphasize participation before we dive into things. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, so the main takeaways for today's training are going to be to, again, increase general personal preparedness among our MRC community, to identify the importance of personal and family preparedness, as well as how you will receive information in an emergency. So let's get into the basics of personal preparedness. If there is anything that I hope that you take away from this evening's presentation, it is to be prepared and making sure that you know what is going to happen in an emergency. So what are the local hazards in your area? Are you in an area that's prone to flooding, wildfires, perhaps hurricanes, among many other things? But knowing what the dangers are in your area is the best starting point overall for the basics of preparedness. And then from there, creating a plan of how to react in the event an emergency does end up coming to your neck of the woods. All right. So there are some things that you definitely want to think about. And we have them kind of set up in this like little 3-point jingle, if you will. It's what to have in your head. Knowledge is power. What to have in your hand. Things are pretty powerful too. And finally, what to have in your home. So let's get started with figuring out the basics of making a plan by getting some information on board in our heads. What to have in your head. There's some things that you definitely want to think about or write down when there is an emergency or when you're trying to plan for an emergency in your area. So in the event there is an emergency, who are you going to contact? Do you have a family member, a loved one? Do you have an emergency contact in your neighborhood? Maybe even like a next door neighbor? Do you have a block captain? Do you have somebody that you can contact if there is an emergency, not just locally, but also outside of your area in the event you have to evacuate for some reason? Let's hope not. And how are you going to contact them? Are you going to reach them by phone or by text? Are you going to be able to even call them because the phone lines are all, messed up because everyone else is trying to call? So would it be better to text? Do you have a backup battery for your phone? In the event something happens in your area, do you have a place to go? Um, I'm just going to pull a little bit from my own personal experience. Working on this presentation definitely made me think about these things a lot. I can say that for me, I have family in Montgomery County, and I also have some more family in Maryland. So I know that if I do have to go somewhere, I can go there. I do have a car, but in the event I didn't, how would I get out there if I have to evacuate? If I'm heading to Montgomery County, I'd have to think about public transit, like, SEPTA. But if we're talking Maryland, we're talking something a bit more extensive, like maybe Amtrak. These are just a couple of things to think about whenever you're planning how to prepare an emergency, to prepare for an emergency, for your own particular set of circumstances. Yes. Okay. Naturally, that is a lot of information to think about. And that's okay because in the event, in the moment of an actual emergency, it is entirely human to not really be able to remember a lot of that stuff. It can be really hard to remember all of the important details in the moment. So the best thing to do is not just have it in your head, but to have it written down. And I'm not talking, in a note in your phone, but on a physical piece of paper with a writing utensil in an easily accessible place. Writing down all of the important information. Let's see, what have we spoken about? Your out of tone contacts, any neighborhood meeting places, the information of your kids' schools if you have them, medical contacts, insurance information, the works. And again, not just for yourself, but for your loved ones as well. It's also a good idea to have a health information card similar to this one that we have here. And we actually created this. This is from our program. And I believe Satori should be able to pop those in the chat in the event you do want to print and download them yourself. We are happy to provide those as well this evening. But as for these health information cards, they're really useful because it's a one-stop shop on anything to do with emergency contacts, any medications that you may be taking, the dose, how often, or how many times a day you have to take those medications, your blood type. It's really important to have that information down, including any medical conditions. So let's say that, let's hope not, I get knocked unconscious in Center City in the middle of Market Street. So someone has to call 911. Having my health info readily available will make things so much easier for emergency personnel and first responders. And I have that in my bag. Again, not to dive into my own personal point of reference, but I carry an EpiPen for medical and food allergies. And so therefore I have paperwork in my bag that explicitly lists those allergies, which is super important if medical personnel are trying to help me. So again, gauging your own personal needs and adhering to it from there. All right, so we've covered everything that goes into our heads, but now let's get into what goes into our hands. So naturally, if you have to evacuate from your house, you need to, have certain things to survive. We would prefer that. And this is why it's really important to have a go bag. So in the chat, if folks are willing to pop a couple things in here and there, just off the top of your head, and yes, you can use the image on the screen as a small cheat. What are some items that you think should be included in a go bag? And I just realized I cannot see the chat, so we're in
I
suspense.
got you. I'm seeing medicine, torch, food.
All right.
I would put
Yeah, for
Okay,
sure.
flashlight. There we go. Flashlight is a really good one.
Flashlight, absolutely, yeah. And
Someone
having
said water, flashlights,
mhm.
food, medication, matches.
Matches for sure, definitely, because flashlights are great until the batteries die. So also having some backup batteries is a good idea, because that can be for flashlights, a battery operated radio, nudge nudge radio, or some people have those hand crank radios as well. But all of these are great examples. Um, at at the end of the day, it comes down to what it is that is specific to what your needs are. But again, items that folks will typically put into their go bags are bottled water, non-perishable food, so think like canned goods, things like that. A flashlight, radio, first aid kit, a whistle in case you have to signal for help. Um, let's see, tape. Um, among other things that are not 100% coming to mind. So, and I do want to emphasize what goes into your hand and what goes into your home does have a good bit of overlap. Let's get into what we need to have in our homes. So, with our homes, it's really important because, yes, having a go bag is great, but what happens if you need to shelter in place and you can't leave your home? So, suddenly that's a whole new ballgame to think about. Being ready to shelter in place, you're looking at making sure that you have at least 3 days worth of supplies ready to go until someone can come and get you to safety. So again, thinking about those items in the go bag, but also just having a greater abundance of it. From there, you'll also want to identify a room that has few doors or windows, depending on the emergency and what's going on. I know that we typically don't get tornadoes here in Philadelphia, but it is always a good thing to be aware of. And on top of that, you'll want to move any hazardous materials out of the way. So think of those gas cans that may be sitting in your garage, or those chemicals and cleaning supplies that are hanging out into your kitchen sink. In the event there's a flood, I know for a fact I would not want a bunch of random gasoline just, be bopping around my living room. And finally, you'll also have to know how to shut off your utilities. So your gas, your water, your electricity, if need be. And this isn't in the slides, but it is a good thing to be aware of. And I'll have a whole separate slide on insurance. But one last thing is having a good idea of what your insurance covers, whether it's home insurance or if you're a renter, your renter's insurance as well. And again, I'll get to insurance in a minute, but I just wanted to mention that here. Alrighty. So this is an official checklist that was released by the City of Philadelphia's Office of Emergency Management. It's a home emergency kit checklist. And it has some very important items on here that we definitely mentioned earlier. I see the flashlights, I see the water, I see the food, but a bunch of different things, as well as some other items. Just taking a look at it right off the top, I see wrench. That would be good for turning off certain utilities in a house. A can opener for that non-perishable food, etc. But first aid kits, whistle to signal for help, masks. We've lived in COVID, so I think we've learned the importance of masks, especially if you have to evacuate and you're in a shelter setting. Hygiene supplies like towelettes, hand sanitizer, you name it. Again, I just want to emphasize the thing with these go bags is that you want to make a bag that suits you and your personal needs. For example, I personally don't have any pets at the moment, unfortunately. So you're not about to see me put a bunch of Purina and chew toys into my go bag, for example. So again, just being aware of that. This is a really good basic starting point, and then you can specify it to your needs. And we can talk a little bit about that later too. All right, so now we're going to talk about everyone's favorite thing, and that is food. So during an emergency, I think we can all agree that the last thing that you want to worry about is, an extra zing of listeria or salmonella, while you're dealing with a flood or something. So let's just go ahead and get some basic food practices out of the way. We'll start off with the do's. The do's, keep your food in covered containers, not just from a storage perspective, but to prevent any unplanned flood water or extra dust getting into your food. That's not a good time. Next, keeping your cooking and eating utensils clean. Um, this is just good, proper hygiene, and it also will prevent any foodborne illness. And throwing away any food that does come into contact with contaminated floodwater. I know that many of us have taken in how wonderful the streets of Philadelphia are, regardless of Mayor Parker's valiant efforts in cleaning all the blocks. I don't think anyone wants what's on the streets of Philadelphia in our food. So, and then finally throwing away any food that has been at room temperature for 2 hours or more. And just any food that has a funky odor, color, texture. If it doesn't look good, just get rid of it. And then this is a little bit more specified towards folks that may have little ones in their lives, but in the event you do have an infant or a baby, doing your best to have ready to feed formula on board and ready to go. Because naturally with infant formula, you have to mix it in with water. So doing your best to use bottled water for that, or boiled water is an absolute last resort. And then of course there's also breastfeeding. That's also totally encouraged. But the main takeaway is to have food that is safe, non-perishable, and that is food that your family will eat and adheres to any dietary restrictions you may have in the equation. Now, the don'ts of food safety. Do not eat food from cans that are swollen, dented, corroded, even if it may look and smell safe to eat. You're in the middle of an emergency. Don't throw a last minute round of botulism in there for good measure, because that doesn't sound like a good time. And the same, as I said, same goes for if it looks or smells strange, just don't eat it. And finally, any garbage that may be in your house, do your best not to let it accumulate. That's not just for sanitation reasons, but also it's a fire hazard. All right. So, oh, yep, there it goes. All right. And then let's look at the other side of the equation, and that is safe water. So for those of you who, I know many of you here are first responders, so I'm sure y'all are very familiar with this. There is a very strict hardline rule of thumb that's used in personal preparedness, and that is to have 1 gallon of water per living thing per day. So again, we talked about sheltering in place, 3 days worth of supplies. So that means you need 3 gallons of water for 3 days for yourself, your partner, your grandmother, your cat. Everybody gets 3 gallons of water for 3 days, 1 gallon a day. Now, there are certain people in certain circumstances in which you may need more water than that. And that may include children, people who may be nursing, and people who are especially sick, or, depending on what the medical emergency may be. If we're in the middle of a humongous heat wave and another emergency comes in, yeah, you're probably going to want a little bit more water per person. And also if it's a warmer climate. So there's also that as well. However, I will say that the other big thing is to never ever ration your water unless you're expressly told by authorities to do so. And usually that only happens in very specific and special circumstances. And furthermore, drinking water that isn't contaminated first, that just opens up the door for a whole host of different waterborne illnesses that you probably don't want to have to be grappling with during an emergency. And of course, water, especially during an emergency, is one of the most important things. The first main important thing is air, and then number 2 is water. So doing your best to avoid carbonated or caffeinated beverages instead of drinking water would not be advised. It pains me to say that as someone who loves coffee, but that is the main rule of thumb in an emergency context. Okay, so let's say that you are told that you need to evacuate. Let's think about some things that may be at the forefront of your thoughts. First order of business, if you have a vehicle, is your vehicle ready? How are you doing on a bunch of different things? Gas, jumper cables, windshield wiper fluid, weather preparedness materials. Do you have non-perishable food stocked? Do you have a blanket or 2 in the back of the car? Do you have a map in the event Google Maps decides to not work because the internet's not working? Because we've all been there. Do you have a first aid kit, a charger for your car, to go with those jumper cables, and other supplies such as flashlight, among other things. And I went a little too far, sorry. Another thing to keep in mind, especially if it's winter time and there may be snow, do you have chains for your tires or a scraper for your car? Um, Even kitty litter works in a pinch, to try and get traction, for your tires, in a pinch. So I think you guys saw the picture of the cat, not to spoil things. For another of people's favorite things, preparing for your pets. I know for me personally, my family has dogs, absolutely cannot live without them. Their safety in an emergency is a humongous priority for me and my family. Might be slightly higher than the humans, but that's okay. But the point is you have to make sure that you take certain things into account if you're trying your best to prepare for your pets as well. The first order of business is having a picture of you with your pet. This may sound a little silly, but I'll explain why. In the event you are for some reason separated from your pet, it is important that you have a picture of yourself and your pet together. It makes finding them and verifying that they are your pet a lot easier. Um, on top of that, you want to make sure that you have their medical records, their vaccine records, especially if you're thinking of like rabies and bordetella in the event you have to go into a shelter setting, if you're evacuating. And think of the stuff you need for your pet in general. A pet carrier, leash, collar, bowls, things like that. Medication, if that's something that's going on, especially if you have a pet that's a little older. Food and bowls for the food to go into as well. And of course, you want some toys and treats on board because pets get bored just like us. Some people will even practice evacuating with their pets to make sure that they aren't overly scared or anxious while an emergency is happening. Just to get them used to the cadence of, okay, we're getting in the car and we're going to have all of this here and not to freak out if this happens. It's just in general very important. Yes, bowls. And then of course I do want to emphasize 1 gallon of water per living thing per day. And that does include your pet, whether you have a teeny weeny tiny kitty, or a Maine Coon cat, or a Yorkie or a Great Dane. That just goes across the board for any. And litter for your cat, of course. We need litter for the cat. All right. So preparing for your children. Again, you will also need some specific items for them in their bags. We're going to kick this off with medical supplies that they may need, as well as baby supplies. If your child is an infant, making sure to put those baby supplies together with the medical supplies. So think like the diapers, the baby formula, pacifiers, lotion, baby toothpaste, you name it, a breast pump for those who are currently using them. And having toys as well, to keep them occupied and busy. Never underestimate the power of a favorite stuffed animal, especially during a stressful or traumatizing event. As well as a change of clothes. Again, keep in mind the rule of thumb that we're working with here is 3 days worth of supplies. So again, 3 days worth of clothes. So going in a little different direction, I wanted to briefly talk about preparing for older adults and caregivers. I know that a lot of folks have older relatives, and some of you may have older relatives that you may live with, and they have their needs and emergencies as well. Again, I'm just speaking from my own personal experience. I spent almost 10 years caring for my grandmother, and she needed a lot of different things to function. So the first thing to keep in mind is medical supplies and medicine. She always had to have a bunch of different things on board to make sure that she was okay. Spare eyeglasses, hearing aids, her mobility aids. She had a walker and a wheelchair, medical equipment, batteries for the medical equipment, her medicine, so much more. Anyone who has an older relative at home or is a caregiver should keep those items in mind, including copies of insurance records, such as Medicare, Medicaid, other forms of insurance, depending on circumstances, as well as having a clear list of medical conditions, diagnoses, and their corresponding medications. Again, speaking from personal experience, my family, we had laminated copies of this information that we kept in her wheelchair pocket at all times, as well as in her bedside table. That's what worked best for us, but it might be something for you to consider in the event you do have older relatives. And 3 days worth of clothes. Never forget the 3 days worth of clothes. So if there's anything that you take away from the past couple of slides, it's this. There are always going to be special considerations because everyone's lives and needs are different. So regardless of your needs, it's vital to tailor your preparedness kit and your plan to those needs. In the event you have dietary restrictions in your family, making sure that foods that work for you are picked. If you have medications that need to be refrigerated, making sure that you have a cooler with ice packs on board and on your list would be a good place to start. The point is that disasters are stressful and traumatizing. There's really no way to, slice and dice it, really. And planning accordingly will minimize their adverse impact on not just you and your loved ones, especially since many of you are first responders and you're the ones actively responding in emergency yourselves. I've also gone ahead and included a slide about low-cost preparedness. So if you want to have your mind blown after this training, if you go on Amazon and you look up an emergency preparedness kit, you'll find pre-made kits on there. And some of them cost like $150 a kit, which I think we can all agree is a bit much. I would not recommend doing that. If you want to, that's your thing, but I wouldn't recommend it. But the most economical and powerful tool in your toolbox is that knowledge is power. So again, going back to what we talked about earlier, knowing which disasters are most common in your area is extremely effective because you can tailor what you pack by what you are most likely to grapple with in an emergency. For example, I grew up in Virginia, right at the bottom of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and we always prepared for mudslides and landslides. But that's not really something that is a thing here in Philadelphia, so it makes sense that you would not necessarily be as prepared for it. Next up, signing up for emergency alerts. This is a super free, easy way to make sure that you are aware of any incoming disasters. You can do so through the Office of Emergency Management's website, among others. And finally, keeping your ear to the ground about free programs in the area. The Office of Emergency Management holds workshops similar to this pretty often, to my understanding. And the Philadelphia Fire Department also provides free resources, most notably free smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. It's just looking for things in your area that are available to you. Swinging back to your kits and maintaining them. It's best to try and update them about twice a year or as needed. And getting rid of any old or expired items that may be in there, as well as adding new ones that are now relevant. So if you're planning on starting a family in the next couple of years or getting a pet in the coming months, then you'll have to go back to your go bags and update them and make sure that you have things for them. And also making sure that, oops, sorry about that. And also in the event paper records are too cumbersome because that can be pretty bulky, keeping a backup drive of all of your relevant information is a very good idea as well. So the last big thing that I wanted to talk about here is insurance. Please do your best to, of course, have all of your insurance information ready to go in the event that there is an emergency, but to take pictures of any and all high cost items and all of the paperwork that is needed. The reason I tell you this is in the event that there is an emergency and some of those high cost items are damaged, you want to make sure that there is explicit documentation of those items prior to the disaster being, not damaged, and then they're being damaged because of the disaster. So that way your insurance companies can't shimmy out of, helping pay for damaged or destroyed valuables. So we've gone through a bunch of different ways to prepare. I grabbed this particular visual off of FEMA's website about a bunch of different ways that you can continue to prepare. And I'd say we covered almost all of them, if not all of them. Again, it comes down to not just having your documents ready to go, having a plan, and being signed up for alerts in your local area, but it's also getting involved in your community and making sure that people are connected and can lean on each other during emergency. I'd say you guys are well on your way. You're part of the MRC. I did just want to end with this analogy. I'm sure many of us have heard of an analogy similar to this, where you're on an airplane and you're mid-flight and something goes wrong. The air pressure in the cabin goes wonky. All of the air masks drop down and people ask, okay, so what do you do? And the important thing is that you put your own mask on first before you turn to other people to help them. You make sure that you and your loved ones are taken care of first before going out and helping others in your immediate proximity. I feel like that's a very good way of putting how all of you are as first responders. You make sure that other people are okay. But by participating in personal preparedness and making sure that you have a concrete plan for your own personal preparedness, you can feel confident and rest assured responding in an emergency, knowing that not just you're taken care of, but also your loved ones are safe and taken care of. And I would say that's probably the most powerful thing if you're going into an emergency. So I do think that is everything that I have for you this evening. Thank you so much for bearing with me while I talk at you. And I welcome any and all questions. I saw the chat kind of popping up here and there, so I'm really excited to see what y'all have to say.
Thank you, Margaret, for that presentation and training. I'll monitor the chat, but I haven't seen any pressing or any questions at all, which is great. Must mean you answered everyone's questions already. So yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. If they happen to come to you, after this training is concluded, please feel free to email me, and then we can get those answers to you. Again, greatly appreciate you, Margaret, for providing this training and information to all of us. And thank you to all of you for joining us on a Monday evening. We'll be bringing more virtual trainings to you like this in the future, so stay tuned for more from us. And with that, we will give you back some time in your afternoon or your evening. And we hope that you all have a great night, and we'll see you around soon. Someone said, there's one question. Someone asked,
Actually,
are
yeah, I
there
just
any
saw. Oh,
specific
I'm so excited.
Someone asked, are there any specific recommendations in the event of a nuclear disaster? With an example like iodine. So, I mean, that's a good question.
That is a very good question. I would absolutely love to get back with you upon doing some research.
A little tidbit, as MRC volunteers, if you didn't know before, we do what we call pods, or points of dispensing training and exercises. We had one this past March actually that walked volunteers through like exactly what to expect if we had to do a real points of dispensing in the event of some unfortunate event. So like a nuclear disaster or something like that, we would probably more than likely set up a pod and kind of get situated from there and then move on forward, pending the recommendations from other very important agencies that we would probably partner with on that. And then someone said, what is the next? Okay, so the next session will come out. We'll be sending out emails. I'll send out reminders and invitations to all of you for when we will be doing either a second segment or a virtual training like this in the future. We love the feedback, so we will definitely make sure that we will bring this back and offer this all to you again. All right. All right, with that, I will hang out if anybody needs me, but if not, please go on and enjoy the rest of your evening. And then thank you again, Margaret. We really greatly appreciate it. And you've been getting nothing but praises in the comments as well.
I appreciate you guys having me. Thanks for letting me join you this evening.
Of course. Thank you again. All right, everybody, take care and have a great evening.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.